Is everyone?
Where's Ricky?
Ricky's not here.
What about Ian? Is he coming?
Ian is
Oh,
here.
Ian's there. I don't have my glasses on.
I think since it's already past 6, I'm going to go ahead and start, yeah? Even though hopefully Ricky will get here. So welcome, everyone. So we have a 2-hour meeting tonight, and last meeting we ran a little late, so we had a lot going on, so let's try to keep it to 8 o'clock. Mid-meeting, maybe we can talk about whether that makes sense, but let's aim for that. Alice, you're new. Welcome. Welcome. Do you know everyone? And yeah, we all know each other. Okay.
Gilbert.
So,
I don't know her.
So what we're going to do tonight is focus on, I think most of the meeting might be spent on the other options. We've been looking at the accelerated merger because there's a looming deadline on that. And we've been working on the report, but we're going to now take sort of a brief break from that, although we'll touch on it to some extent, and look at the other options. We do have several things to really hunker down on for the report, and we'll see how much time we can allow to that. We have been, as you guys know, opening up a portion of the meeting for public comments, and we'll continue to do that. We do ask that everyone is very respectful of each other on the committee and in the public. And I think it'd be helpful for us to remember our norms. Alice, I know you've been a part of this, but you've probably read these. But actually, can someone read the norms? Does anyone have them in front of them? Matt, do you want to read them? Okay.
I'll read them.
Okay.
Excuse me. Committee guidelines. Number 1, work sessions will start and end on time. Work sessions will typically last 2 hours unless decided otherwise by the committee. Number 3, members will give and receive with good intentions. Number 4, members will follow 3 before me as a guide, so all members have the opportunity to speak. Members will conduct committee business in front of the group. Members will understand that silence on the part of another member does not imply agreement. Members will cite sources of evidence during discussion. All members will be included in conversation, and no side conversations will be conducted during the work session. Members will stay on topic during discussions and will request the clerk make note of additional topics for future discussion. Members will engage in the work at hand, and administration will provide the space and support as needed to do so.
Sounds good. I do want to point out, just an aside, how pleased, I feel very lucky to be on this committee. I feel like I'm amongst a group of people who are working really hard and are dedicated and have a very open mind and are trying to do the best thing in a very, very challenging situation. And I want to just let you know that we have a sort of a wealth of history here from Amy Wall, who's been on her board for 12 years. We've got Mark, who's been on his board for 7. I don't know if anyone else here has been on. How long have you been on? 6, yeah. So there are people who've been on quite some time. So we are lucky. Let's go ahead and approve the minutes. Hi, Ricky.
Hey, everybody, sorry, Mike.
Is there a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Oh, any discussion?
I didn't catch who moved and seconded, I'm sorry.
Kim moved it.
Okay, thank you.
So no discussion. Is all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No? All right, no abstentions. They stand. Do we have the list to go around, Amy?
We do.
Okay, so what we do is we collect names from folks, from the public, so if you would please fill that in, and I think it says what town you're from.
I didn't fill them out for this time. Okay, well, here.
Okay, so what we're gonna, you do have one? Okay. So I think this is a blank piece of paper, so just
Yeah.
put your name, print print and put your town. We're going to review the draft options, the draft that you guys came up with, and then we're going to open for public comment. So this is a draft of the various options, which has been worked on by Jill and Beth, and Dave to some extent, and perhaps a little bit Matt, or you stayed in. I think Matt,
Yeah, we gotta do
there was also a conference, oh, who am I?
Yeah,
Yes.
who are you?
There was also a conference call yesterday with Chris Leopold, who's our hired consultant, who's a lawyer up north, and who's been very involved with other groups across the state as they create reports or decide how to move forward. So thanks for meeting with him. They're passing around a report. And how do you guys want to do this? Do you want to talk us through the options, or what's your, what do you think?
Did somebody bring the phase flow chart thing too?
Yeah.
We could probably pass that out at the same time.
Thank you. Oh,
Kim?
Well.
I put it out on big paper because my eyes already are bad from this. Thanks. I thought, yeah, pass them here, just let them distribute as they wish.
My children call me money.
so Beth and Jill, do you want to talk us through it?
Yeah, do you want me to pass out our thoughts on advantages and disadvantages? Do you want to leave that till after?
I would leave that until afterwards.
So, what we basically did was take the information on the websites and try to put it into a format that compared them side by side. And we used the wording that's on the Agency of Education's website. There's interesting other wording out there, but at least this is what was there, so. We've been calling it accelerated, but the actual term the lawyer used yesterday was accelerated for the preferred for phase one. And then he had a different wording, Ron, on conventional as well.
Said conventional for preferred option as well.
So, and he also noted that under phase two, you could actually put a whole nother column of the conventional and call and work through that, but we decided that it really made sense to leave it like it is. So, what we've been looking at is the phase one accelerated for the preferred. Phase two, reds and red variations, and then they're in the colored charts. They're reds side by side, layered merger, which they've also called the Union Elementary merger, and then the modified unified union school district, or MUD. And then the phase three and retaining current structure. And so then we went through and we took a general explanation, and then all of the other things on the left as you go down were items that could be different, and tried to see if they are different. So, as you come through, the age of students is the same in all the phases. So all of these are looking at pre-K through 12. The number of students is different. It's minimum of 900 average daily enrollment. Is that what ADM students? And in order to qualify for tax incentives, so you could do a phase one with lower numbers, but you wouldn't be able to qualify for the tax incentives. The number of students in any of these reds are supposed to be a minimum of 1,250 or a merger of at least 4 districts. Again, in order to qualify for tax incentives, you could do something, but you wouldn't be qualifying. Phase 3 was 900, and then retaining current structure obviously is not applicable. Tax incentives, I think that's clear for everybody. That's 10,8,642 only for the accelerated. The phase 2 and 3 are 8,642. Equalized tax rates are actually the same in phase 1, 2, 3. Vote dates. Oh, the difference though is, if you read exactly under the accelerated, it's during the years in which homestead property is reduced, equalized tax rate for each town will not increase by more than 5% in a single year. Whereas under the reds, it will not increase or decrease, and under phase 3, it's also increase or decrease. Vote dates, obviously what we've been looking at is the fastest, July of this year. The reds are all before 2017 July. There's no vote date for the conventional, and there's no town vote paperwork to state. By November 30th, 2017 is when we would kick, if we retained our current structures, when the state would come back and say something to us. Operational dates, operational before July 17 or July 2019. School choice, and were very specific on their wording. Neither current statute nor Act 46 authorizes a district to operate a school and concurrently pay general education tuition for a grade or grades operated by the district for anybody except for what we retain now, and then Vernon has their specialized. On page 2 here, the small schools grant. On the accelerated, it stays, and if you close a school and renovate or construct another as a part of the closure, grant continues until capital debt is paid. And in the red, small school grant stays, and I guess the same thing, I guess it's the same for all, sorry. School closures is, I think I didn't type that in, dang it. It's supposed to say, may be addressed by language inserted into articles of agreement crafted by the study group. And then the difference here is in phase 2, there's another act called 153, prohibits closure of any school within the first 4 years without town electorate approval. Additionally, this may be addressed by language inserted into the articles of agreement crafted by the study group. And that's also true for phase 3 conventional. The transition facilitation grant, you can read through that. I don't know that that's that interesting for us anyway. Or,
Well,
What does it mean?
we are using part of the transitional grant. We have a $20,000 grant to be used for legal fees for facilitation. We're not using it for facilitation.
And then the one thing that was surprising to us yesterday on the phone call was, to all of us, the additional schools outside of the supervisory union allowed. And honestly, in reading what it says on the Agency of Education website, I couldn't understand what the lawyer was saying, but he was quite insistent that we could, at this point, which is what we have been erroneously under the idea that that answer would be no, but he said, yes, you could actually take another school and put it into this merger at this point, but it's not required. I know, it doesn't say that anywhere on the website, but he was very insistent yesterday.
I've been told the opposite.
Yeah, he was, we questioned him, I brought up and read him what I saw on the website, and he still insisted, and I couldn't follow the logic of what he was
Okay.
saying, but he said that it's not required. He's also heard some groups that have gone before the state's approval
Exceptions.
process that have been asked whether they've looked at other people outside of the supervisory union. But he was clear that every district currently within the supervisory union must still merge. That part we had clear. And then obviously under the reds for phase 2 and 3, yes. And then any additional options. And we've made a note as a study group that under the reds, many possible scenarios could happen under all of these 4 red options. And my suggestion would be that we take that other sheet of paper we just passed around and walk through using those flow chart type information. And in that way we could all think together as to which options might be appealing and see if they meet the various criteria. Now, we did do that. Beth and Dave and I understood our task to be that we were supposed to look at these different options, phases, and then also look at them in regards to what we as a supervisory union might think of. And that's where we came up with this other sheet that, Alice, you don't want us to look at yet. That was the benefits and the advantages and
We
disadvantages.
certainly could, but I think we should talk through this first. Whenever you two think is the best timing.
Well, what it does is, I think we could pass them out and we could talk through, but this is basically what we came up with as advantages and disadvantages in the different sections. And really, I think that's the bottom line that we came up with is we didn't see any great advantages to doing any of the reds, but we thought other people should all look at that as well and come to their own conclusions. The three of us didn't see that that would make sense, but anyway. So then at that point, if you want to walk through, but I mean, you,
Why don't we all then glance at these since you're passing them out, Jill?
all right.
Is that,
And the lawyer did go through it yesterday and agreed with what we wrote. Really, actually, Alice, the lawyer didn't have a lot of changes to what we had put
that's
in.
good?
But you did highlight on the third page advantages and disadvantages that you have to make sure you're objective and some of the information is subjective. And you've got to,
Which is what I was gonna say, yeah. That when we wrote advantages and disadvantages, that was our opinion. So everything on this page is subjective. Well, I guess you could argue. I mean, well, I don't know, there's people that argue about the tax breaks and the numbers as well, but anyway.
And I think maybe to elaborate a little bit more is when we were discussing some of these other options, we were thinking, you know, what are the real advantages to the merging? What is it that we think will benefit us? And would we recognize that same benefit if only a couple of us merged? And that's where the question came up, that we weren't sure that we would realize the benefit that is anticipated from everybody merging by just a couple merging. So that's where I think
That's where we came up with a conclusion. Plus, the idea of basically, when and walking through this, you guys might have other ideas, but when we walked through the flow charts, we looked at it and said, well, one option that's out there is breaking into two districts, say Brattleboro and everybody else for outlying schools, and making those two districts. And so then some of our comments and the advantages and disadvantages came from that idea. So if we look at the chart, I guess.
Do you have extra copies of that?
they should be going around.
They're right there.
Thank
I
you.
made 25. So the advantage on the phase one, only one that offers almost 1 million in tax breaks for our towns in 2017 in the aggregate. Smaller schools maintain viability. Small schools maintain their small school grants if they're currently receiving them, which I think is the case for Guilford.
That's the only school,
Is
right?
that the only one?
Well, now we're
Dummerston?
getting, we still get this,
Does Dummerston get it too? So there's two anyway that are getting it. Increased programming throughout the supervisory union. School advisory boards may increase community involvement. Cost savings for the SU overall through increased sharing of resources, and could potentially include outlying schools. And the disadvantages, and again, these are subjective opinions that we've heard from people. So tax increases will be unequal. Savings will be unequal. In other words, that some towns will save more than others. Loss of town meeting votes on budgets and school reports. Ability to control school closures determined by whatever wording goes into the articles of agreement. So then coming into the phase two, the reds, the advantages. We thought it provided a way for most members of the district could proceed if one district does not wish to do so. So if one town decided they just don't want to be a part of this, the rest of us could proceed. Various advantages for various scenarios which the study group could identify and determine for themselves. Definitely it gives us more time to look at merger options. We could potentially include outlying schools not currently in our district, again, which is also now an advantage according to what he just gave us yesterday. Could allow for Vernon to keep school choice if they remain their own distinct district on their own. Could allow Putney and Dummerston to merge, for example, which would then allow them to maintain more direct input with their middle schoolers. This option, if we left Brattleboro separate, would also allow Brattleboro to continue with its additional programming with no additional cost, and it would keep Brattleboro Head Start classrooms all in Brattleboro. Could potentially share staff between merged towns, for example, if 3 outlining towns decided to hire a foreign language teacher together. If a red variation is chosen instead of an accelerated option, we didn't feel it would offer as much flexibility in sharing staff as accelerated options. Would not allow for the 10-cent tax incentives the first year. Does not accomplish the goal of all of our towns being responsible for all of our students. Does not require a unified board to continually adjust for equity among various schools feeding into the high school and or the middle school. And another disadvantage, depending on which merger is chosen, would not allow for preschool expansion into other schools using Brattleboro's Head Start funds, would not allow for piggybacking onto Brattleboro's after-school programming without additional cost for the schools, would not allow for expansion of foreign languages to all schools without each school paying more into the system, would not allow for expansion into summer programming without each school paying more, would force Guilford to look very closely at their sustainability as tuition increases to BAMS in 3 years. Phase 3, conventional, again, the advantage, it gives us more time, could potentially include the outlying schools, could be a backup plan if not all the towns voted for the accelerated option. And we felt that the disadvantages are very similar results, but without the 10 cents per year would be the biggest disadvantage. And then again, of course, retaining current structure, retain school boards as we are now, minimum upheaval to existing systems, locally elected representatives would decide how to merge or close schools, would represent the loss of tax incentives, a lack of equity. When we said retaining current structure, we meant that that would mean somebody would be writing out and saying, trying to have a justification to the Agency of Education that we should be able to do that. Because the other option out there is, on the very bottom, doing nothing, just not. And that would have no tax incentives, and it eventually leads to the state making the decision.
So I think, I'm sorry,
Go ahead,
what we had
Beth.
talked about was the idea that under that phase 2, there's so many variations of things that could happen, that if we thought it was worth exploring, it probably would be beneficial, like Jill said, to break into groups and look at some of those different options, because there's just so many, it's too much for just us to look into all of those different options of what would it look like for Brattleboro and everybody else, what would it look like for Guilford, Vernon, Putney, Dummerston, Halifax, Marlborough, like there's so many different scenarios that would fall under that phase 2, that if we thought there was advantages worth pursuing, we should do that, I think, in small groups.
Or with larger representation anyway. That would-
Right.
yeah.
What do you, go ahead.
I have a quick question. So on advantages for phase 1 accelerated, it's just a quick, it says small schools maintain small school grants currently receiving them. Isn't that true for the phase 2 as well as phase 3?
I don't think so.
so.
And I think the lawyer would have said if that was wrong.
Well, because you have here under your general explanation, small schools grant, says small schools grant stays. And phase 3 says small school grant stays.
Maybe we're wrong. Maybe we're right
The phase,
On top of page, sorry, I have my,
there. Well, we can
It's
say
the
that.
second page of the first 2-page, big page handout.
So maybe yes. I don't remember that
That's true in
anymore.
conventional.
So it must be true for all of them.
Okay.
I just corrected it, sorry.
Okay.
So then change the advantage on there that you can add in
you
the
could
small
add that
school.
as an advantage to all of them, I guess.
but not for retaining grant structure.
Right, because that goes out with the law.
Phase 2 and phase 3, it's an advantage for those, and then for the others.
Yep.
That's a good point.
Yep.
Yeah. So the lawyer didn't catch our ear.
So how do we want to progress on this, guys?
I mean, you could look at the worksheet here, because this eligibility worksheet for phase 2 voluntary basically takes you down a chart. Will the proposed merged district be organized and responsible? Yes, continue to 2. I mean, we can do that process if people want to.
So do we want to do that? That's time consuming, but it might be worth it. Okay, why don't Beth and Jill, why don't you take us through those? Is that Kim and Mark, you want to do that now?
But wouldn't this have to be done for each of these different structures that are
Exactly.
talked about?
Yeah.
Well, you're right, but it leads you down to, like, it already narrows you to some things that you can't consider, so if you just read through the flow chart, Beth can lead it.
Will the proposed merged district be organized and responsible for the education of all resident pre-K through 12 students? Yes.
Well, but the one point on that is currently, who has preschool except for Putney,
Oh,
outside of Brattleboro? Nobody, right?
well, but we're responsible through our.
Right.
Everyone is, yeah.
All of us are.
So that would count?
Yeah.
All right, then we're good. So
Will the proposed district either A, be formed by the merger of 4 or more districts, or B, have a total average daily membership of 1,250? So that's where we would be limited by 2 districts merging that didn't equal the 1,250. That, we couldn't do that. 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 Sorry. If answer is yes, you skip 4 and 5. So if everybody agrees with my yes, then we're going to go on to 6. Are you able to bring the proposal to the voters of each potentially merged district to the local votes or prior, so that the local votes are final prior to July 1st, 2017? I think that would be yes. Number 7, would the proposed merged district be able to be operational on or before July 1st, 2019? And I think that would be yes. So really, question 2 was the one that we struggled
We
with.
felt like that eliminated the purpose here. I mean, I didn't, personally, I couldn't see what would the great advantage be of taking Brattleboro kids out of the union system that we have now and trying to make one big district in order to make that count, or merging 4 of you together would come with the other side, but then what are you really gaining?
Right. Yeah, it came down to, would we accomplish what the intention is, what the objectives are, by merging the 4 outlying towns without Brad?
Not really.
But I feel like, because I was reading this after, when I got it in the email too, I was thinking that the combinations, and somebody else said it earlier, are endless. There's an endless possibility of these combinations. And so
Unless you
we
want
could sit here ad nauseum every day for 6 months and come up with a different scenario in which some merger might happen and come up with. I think we need to hone this down a little bit in some way.
I think the question becomes, do people want to merge for the sake of merging without being able to get any tax incentives? And to me, that was where the answer was no. I mean, from what I hear from people, they're concerned about autonomy and having local control and local school choice, then, why would you, what was the other benefit that you get?
Well, then we talked about the sustainability of some of the outlying schools, is the merging would help with that and equalizing the opportunity, and that's separate from the tax. But I don't know if you would get, I don't know if you would accomplish that without Brattleboro.
Do you have a recommendation of how to go further?
Well, I mean, I'm not exactly sure, but as I think about it, it's like maybe we need to figure out in some way what each town wants to do, because we could come up with the best plan option, and if, for like just using an example, because we're sitting in Vernon, if Vernon decided nope, we're out, then that could dramatically change whatever we come up with, and maybe there's a way to figure out whether or not people want to do that merger, because we could plan everything, and then we find out one town wants out. That then has the ripple effect of changing everything.
So do all of us feel comfortable with our knowledge about these various mergers to start having that kind of conversation?
You mean at your regular board meetings? Back
Well,
to town?
even improvise, sort
Yeah.
of discussing it in this setting.
Yeah, that's where I think the town forums that we're having are so important, because, yeah, if Vernon's a no-go because of the school choice, like, it's important for us to know that. I mean, and I don't know that we would know that until it came down to a vote or not, but we have to have backup plans, or if, Dummerston decides they're a no-go, but everybody else is in, then what's our backup plan? Or I mean, any of the surrounding towns, if one of us decide no, then what?
And
In a
I've,
town vote.
and I've struggled too, that if sitting here, sometimes I think this is good, we gotta go forward, and then sometimes I think this is pointless, we'll never get there. And so, but then I come back to this in my head, that story that we all saw, of a union up north, you probably remember the name.
Mansfield.
Which?
Mount Mansfield.
And they didn't bring it, their study group decided it was pointless, I guess, and they didn't bring it to the town to
Oh,
vote.
no, that was
And-
Franklin County.
That's what I'm talking about. And that made me sad at a lot of levels, because I felt like the people ought to have a vote.
The boards rescinded that, and they didn't get it back on track.
And I think
Oh,
they
really?
are about to have a vote.
They are gonna have a vote. Enough members of the study committee
Came back and
came
said,
back
let's
and
do
said
it.
it's not fair to go through this process and not at least bring it to the voters. And they had to do that by a 10% voter checklist. 10% of the voters needed to identify that in each town that they wanted to have it brought to a vote.
I mean, even if Vernon, I feel like Vernon is, the question on school choice, but even if it has to go forward without school choice in it, and we know that the Vernon board has been pretty clear that they want school choice, does that represent everybody in their town? It's kind of a question that I have.
Right, you won't know until
Well,
it goes.
Do you want to speak to that? Want to speak to that?
Want to?
Well, if I could give a little context
Yeah.
of some upcoming, so we have a community forum, February 8th in Vernon. I think study committee members are invited to attend. So I think what the board had said, and Matt, you can jump in, but I think they want to hear from the community, and quite frankly, they haven't had the information that some of the other towns have had. So I think that'll be important to do all of the information that we have at that forum.
I would agree. I think the Vernon board wants to definitely hear from the community, and like any town, there are varying opinions on this within the town. It's not 100% of the people on one side and nobody on the other side. So I mean, it would seem not to be beneficial to not allow the process to play out. I mean, that's part of the process. The voters decide in every town whether they like this or not. The key is making sure, like Ron just alluded to, that people have information. So they're not just voting blank. You know, they need to know what they're voting on. That's the key.
I would, go ahead, Amy.
I wonder, to speak to Ricky's suggestion about honing down, I wonder if it makes sense to continue with the initial plan that we talked about, which was accelerated, and then if something happens and it's pretty clear that Vernon or another town or other towns aren't interested, then maybe we look at the opportunities offered by a conventional, because that would be sort of the next logical.
Well, I was actually wondering, Amy, if it's worth spending a minute or two now talking about the conventional, just because I believe you read last time that your board is interested in that option. Since those are sort of the two active conversations, can we do that? We're going to open up for public. I don't want to hunker down on this.
I wonder too if in a subcommittee group, they could look at the other options. And I mean, I think you really need time to look at all the implications. And a subcommittee could look at the red options and say, okay, so this one would work, this one would be a disadvantage, this one wouldn't work, and bring that. I think it's really hard to, I'm having a hard time just going through this now and thinking, okay, so I did some quick calculations on one of these options as a pre-K-8 system with 570 students, and I know it wouldn't qualify. So I think that sort of information is what you need to do with this document.
So I think, go ahead.
But also with the red variations, we can invite other people to the party as well, and so we may be able to,
Right.
you know, people have been wanting to date Dummerston, so, you know, and we have not had those discussions, so I think it's worth exploring as a Dummerston community to see, you know, how that would look, because maybe there'd be two other towns that would want to join that would get us to 4 districts, so, and we haven't had an opportunity to do that at all.
So are you suggesting that we look at them in forum settings?
I think that would be a great path for Dummerston, I can't.
Okay. So I think, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so question 3 is another one. I heard the way you made the assumption with the first round of this, but question 3 is another one that needs to be addressed in that, you know, if you're not gonna have a pre-K-12 system with this subset of communities, then you're also raising the question of how do we disband or get out of the UHS union? And that's something I would assume, like Ron said, you might want to have some analysis on it. There's a lot of legal issues on that, as opposed to just a general forum, because the general forum discussion needs to be informed by all of those implications.
We
Yeah,
want to
that-
invite more people to the party, that's all.
That was my question is, I mean, if, and I'm gonna pick on Vernon because we're in Vernon. So if Vernon decided not to join, and they were gonna stay their own district, and the rest of us all merge, is there still a union? So does
Are
Vernon
you
have?
talking about the conventional?
Yeah,
Yeah, so Mount Mansfield Union is probably the best example of that. Huntington decided not to be in that, but they maintained their connection with the Union High School. So that was the first year. It looks like the second year they're gonna choose to join. But that was a MUD,
okay.
and that was part of Act 153, so it was prior to 46.
So how does that work though to the way that we're organized with central office? Like,
Same thing. I mean, they did this, it's like taking the accelerated, creating one union district, and one school district said they didn't want to be part of that.
okay,
They didn't have the incentives like you have in this case.
right.
But I think that's the analysis that, you know, by a smaller group, kind of looking at some of these options and say, okay, so what are some of the variations? And at that time, you know, if somebody's from Dummerston or Putney or whatever, the town, and says, well, why don't we check in with Marlboro and see how they're feeling about this configuration? You know, that's part of the subgroup. If you try to do that in a forum, I couldn't keep up with what would be real or what would be just.
So I would imagine that we would need Frank to be a big part of this discussion, is that right?
I think so much of it is a legal issue in terms of how do you go through a process of exiting the union or not. I certainly could contribute, but I'm not an expert in
So it
that.
would be Chris, and
Yeah.
I was just thinking about the finances, because that would definitely be a part of it.
Yeah.
So what do we want to do?
Well, when I interjected, you were starting to talk about the conventional. I think you should do that tonight.
Yeah.
And I think we should think about a subcommittee to look at some of the other options.
Yes, I just want to form that subcommittee. Do we want to wait till the end of the meeting to form those? Because that might be several minutes of conversation of how we want to run those.
So, because it's a subcommittee to explore the red and red variant options?
Yeah.
Now,
Why don't we have the conventional conversation and then see about.
And go from there?
And then put those subcommittees together.
okay, Cheryl, you talk to us about the conventional? Want to talk us through it a little bit more? Or do you want to do that, Matt?
Ron maybe is best to talk through the conventional. I don't feel like I
I mean,
understand.
the conventional,
Well, it's essentially
It's
just
the same.
delaying it by a
yeah.
year.
Yeah.
It's-
You lose the 10 cents, you go into the 8642.
But then you can bring in
in the
other
conventional, you
people.
can bring in other
Right.
outside
But
districts.
he said we could bring in people now.
Yeah, you know, I think to tell you the truth, I think
he's
he was
wrong.
referring to reds.
I don't know,
I know we
questioned
kept
it.
saying accelerated, but I mean, everything I've seen is that you don't. So he's much more versed in it because he's been working with other districts. And he's been working with districts for previous years on the 156 and 153, so maybe that's the context that he's talking about. But anyway, so who's going to talk about conventional?
Well, so you are, Ron, hopefully. But, well, I have a question. So with the conventional, where Vernon would be one district, and then the assumption is that the rest of us would be another district?
No.
What is it?
Well, I mean, it could be, I guess.
What were you guys?
I guess we were thinking any district that opted not to join us. I think what we were envisioning is giving the towns the opportunity to vote on it so that we could see where everybody stood. And assuming that one or two towns opt out of the accelerated, that puts that off the table. And now we would move forward with this conventional, which would then be some number of us joining together kind of in the accelerated fashion, and the other two remaining the same.
The other two?
The other, whatever towns
or whatever
voted
towns
no,
voted no. Right.
would be on their own to figure out what they really wanted to do then. I mean,
So the
that-
others would merge and it would be one board as we've been talking about, or would it be
Yeah, I mean, so in my mind, I was thinking any town that voted, yeah, we want to do this under the conventional, those towns can move forward and do it. The towns that vote no.
As a unified.
As a
board.
unified board, unified districts, everything kind of that we've been talking about in the accelerated, but then the towns that voted no would continue along their way as they are.
Or merge together or do whatever they want, but that would be up to each town at that point. But what we came back to then is, well, what would that really accomplish? It would be the loss of the 10 cents for everybody. And it would mean all the things that we thought we were going to be able to achieve in the accelerated preferred merger would be still there.
right?
That's
my understanding.
So that was our end of our discussion.
But it would be up to each town. I mean, that's the big thing, is you put it to the vote, and then the
Right.
towns that want to do it can do it, the towns that don't, don't.
In our mind, it was kind of the backup plan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
One other advantage that I see for the conventional is that because of the timeline, it would allow for separate votes for whether to merge and the makeup, the election of the board. Because one huge problem I see with pursuing the accelerated at this juncture is that we have to have those votes at the same time, which I feel electing specific individuals to the board at the same time as you are choosing whether or not you're even going to have that merger is prejudicial to the vote. So the conventional merger allows us to have those votes separate.
Why is it prejudicial to the vote either?
Well, because if you are voting for who's going to be on a board, in the mind of the voter, that presumes that that board is going to exist for you to be electing people to.
But I'm confused. The operational date for an accelerated merger is July 2017, so technically you could have a vote, I mean, unless it's worded differently, you could have a vote at next year's town meeting on who would.
No, it all has to be done before
Oh,
July
does?
2016.
Same day.
It has to be done at the same time.
The same vote.
And then
You know, I have-
that new form, and then that new formed board would be working for a year before the new school district actually took effect on 7/17, because they would be doing the governance of that planning process.
Well, you could still have, that really is a big concern. You could do the vote because we said the vote has to be at least a month out. You could do one vote and then charge the towns to do another vote. It's only another
So
$5,000.
having two special elections.
That's a lot of money.
Wait, let's,
The directors have to be voted on the day, I'm pretty sure.
is that the same?
It's the same vote. The directors have to be voted on the same day you vote
Yeah, that's the way I
for
understood
the
it too.
accelerated. That's how I've read it.
Okay. So, anything more about the conventional merger?
One overarching thought that we kept coming back to is what happens under the accelerated? What's the objective behind this? And how do we reach that objective? I think Beth has tried to say this again too, or maybe I'm just repeating what you've already heard, but to us it kept coming back to why would we be looking at this? Okay, because the state told us there's tax incentives and we feel like we have to look at it and it's a law. But as we delve into it, besides that, and even as we started to form the study group, some of us had these excited thoughts of, wait, there's some inequities out there. And we could address these inequities through this type of a merger. And I think as we've had many discussions, we all realize that there are some really positive things that could happen out of the accelerated. So we were saying to ourselves in kind of that lens, how do we get those same really positive things out of any of the other mergers? And we weren't.
And fit it into the requirements that the state has given.
And we weren't finding those.
You weren't fine, okay.
I think you'd
That's-
find that in the conventional, it's just you get less of a incentive, that's
Right.
all.
But we still wouldn't get the same benefit.
Right.
And because leaving out one town that still feeds into our Union High School.
Yeah, I'm not assuming that a town's gonna drop out in A, but
So if a town, that's where we were saying, so if a town doesn't drop out, then the benefit of the conventional is just to buy you more time.
yeah.
So I was thinking of it more as the conventional would be, because maybe, I don't know, if you put it to the towns to vote and they voted something different than everybody yes, then that would be kind of our backup
Yeah.
plan.
But
I don't know why we would continue in the same fashion as the accelerated just a year later.
Right.
Because they're so similar.
Right. Because yeah.
And I guess that's where I'm trying to get at, is you take one town, and we're picking on Vernon because we're here, right? This is the picked on town for tonight. So if Vernon says no and doesn't come in, then the equity, say, of foreign language that we put in, hopefully forever, because I've been so open about that, I'll just keep saying it, that foreign language goes to everybody. And does Vernon do it? So now when we feed, if Vernon continues to feed in, it's up to Vernon whether they want to do it or not. But as they feed in, right now, there's an inequity for kids that have been having language from first or second grade up by the time they get to middle school or high school, as opposed to kids that haven't. So that's where I'm saying that you wouldn't get that part of the equity.
Vernon would not.
Vernon would.
would
If
not.
you were in the conventional and you no longer had everybody in the accelerated. That was our thing. Unless they choose, exactly.
Yeah.
If a town were to not join, what about the support services that are offered by the supervisory union for like transportation?
I was just watching my unit.
You know, most importantly, special education, you know, are those towns, do they become? Maybe
Yeah.
are we gonna be direct billed, are we gonna take a share? I mean,
Yeah, I'm not certain of the exact specifics, but, you know, again, like Mount Mansfield Union, Huntington is still in the union somehow.
But that's under mud too.
It is.
So it's a different structure.
But, you know, I just don't believe the supervisory union or the supervisory district could just say, okay, see you later, you're on your own. I mean, there are certain aspects of the operation that would still be tied in.
Because, I mean, I would think that would be a deal breaker for any town, because if all of a sudden you had to hire a superintendent and a whole staff, like, of what we have in
Well-
central office, I don't know how that.
Ricky?
Well, I agree with you about that. I think that would be a deal breaker for most towns, but I also, I'm curious, similar to what Frank said too, about who's part of the Union High School if a town does not just go with the merger. I question, and I'm not sure, this is like a question for the lawyers, does that mean that once the merger happens, all former agreements are dissolved, and then like, say, for instance, a town that didn't join the merger, they would then have to recontract, say, with WSESU to be their superintendent, to be their financial people, you know what I mean? Like, if one of the towns didn't go with the merger. Would that just have to be a new legal agreement? I don't know, just.
The current process is that the law that prevails since the 70s that created the unions is still in play with the Act 153, in that under any of these scenarios, whatever combinations of towns want to change the status of the union original agreement have to have that vote to be released from the union. So that's where, like you were saying, Jill, there's just so many different scenarios, but ultimately under any one of those scenarios, if any of the 5 towns wants to exit the UHS union, all 5 towns have to vote. In each of the towns, there has to be a unanimous agreement to exit, and then you can reform. But if there isn't that agreement, then you can't disband the union.
So Frank, you're just saying that we should just, if everybody's got a vote to let them out, then we all might as well go forward being together, because we're already together. I mean, that's basically what you're saying, isn't it?
I'm just saying that's
Just
the
play
law.
out the scenario then, so we're picking on Vernon, we continue. So Vernon says no, we're not gonna go forward. Everybody else in the districts say yes, let's go forward and become a super district of accelerated preferred.
Right.
Now,
But that-
we all vote?
So that means the union still exists, and you have now modified the union. That's what's called the MUD, Modified Unified Union. So the union still exists under that scenario, and Vernon is still a member. That didn't get changed. The
So
existence
you're
of-
saying we're not an accelerated?
You're not an accelerated in that scenario, that's right. The accelerated says all 5 current union members must participate. So you lose the accelerated benefit, the tax incentive.
And Vernon is a full union
Yeah.
member, even though they have school
Yes.
choice.
Yeah. The issue in that scenario is, would the state board allow a school district to essentially separate from a regional system? And the background in Act 46, when you read the purpose of the law, is to address those sort of autonomous units that are not large enough to offer a comprehensive program under themselves.
So it's fully possible for sort of the conventional to go forward and everyone but Vernon unify, and then in a couple of years down the road, the Board of Ed saying, well, actually, Vernon, you need to join,
Possible.
you need to join.
It's
No,
possible.
I think if I
What,
could
can you,
just
hold on, you're not,
interject.
I'm not recognizing you yet. Okay.
Act 46 actually.
Can you
addresses
wait,
that.
please? Go ahead.
It sounds like when we're doing our comparison here, when we're looking at the conventional, we're assuming that a town will not be participating, which, that's kind of a pointless comparison, because if a town chooses not to participate, we have to go conventional, we can't do accelerated.
Correct.
So for comparison purposes, we have to compare accelerated to a conventional in which all towns participate.
So then the advantage at that point is just time. And what
Nothing
is the
else
advantage
changes.
of time?
Well, I pointed out the one with the,
Okay,
with the votes.
with the vote, yeah.
Being able to do those votes separately unless I think get a fairer vote. The other is having more time to,
Sorry, it would, sorry to interrupt, it would be the same vote would need to happen, scenario would happen in conventional.
they still have to be on the same
Yeah,
day.
they have to be together.
That's-
But I interrupted you, so.
Okay. Another would be more time to work through this process and present it to the town.
Right.
And a third is that we would not have to have special town meetings. We wouldn't have to pay out that money. And at a special meeting, you get generally fewer people. You're not going to get the same turnout you're going to get at your conventional meeting. So you're not hearing from as broad a spectrum in that special meeting.
Does our study committee continue after the first vote? So if
Yeah.
the towns vote and they say no, then do we all come back to the
Better.
normal?
Because if you don't, then you're subjecting yourself to doing nothing,
Right.
and then you're gonna get a high penalty.
So guys, it's just around 7 o'clock. Shall we run about 15 minutes late?
Well,
Or can we, well, right. We have a lot to talk about, so we're gonna have to talk about this small committee, if we still agree that we should look at the regs. I'd also suggest that we form a group to look at either do it in this setting, or ask Vernon to do it, or a small group to look at the conventional, what that would look like in perhaps more detail. But we do ideally have an hour, and we want a chunk of public comment. We have meetings to schedule, and it sounds to me like we still want to keep looking at the report. for the accelerated merger possibility, and so there are several things to talk about. So
So we should look at a committee form if people want to do the rest.
I suggest that we do that, and then we open it for public comment. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so I want to remind us that when we do have these subcommittees, it can't be a majority of members, or it would need to be a warned meeting.
So how many is
So-
the majority?
Well, so there are 9 voting members. I would assume that we base it on the voting members.
So 4 or less.
Right. What do you think? What would be the majority in that? The ex,
You have 9 voting members?
yeah.
Can I just ask a
Yeah.
question about that? Because none of us, well, very few of us are on the same boards, and we're not taking any action as a
Yeah,
study
I would
committee, so
say that.
it doesn't matter how many of us get together in a small group,
Yeah.
because we're just a work group,
Right.
study committee
If
working on
that's
this.
how we view it, yeah.
So we're not breaking any election law because there's not a majority of any one of the boards sitting here.
Yeah, and you're not.
With the
key is you're not
exception of,
taking
with the
action.
exception of Brattleboro Town Board, as long as the 3 of them aren't together, we're not breaking any
We don't get along all.
confidentiality, we're not breaking any group laws, so I don't think that matters so much.
Right,
Yeah.
you're not taking action.
It's just a very active conversation in
Yep.
the state, so I want to
Yep.
make sure we're all on board with that.
Yep.
Okay, so I suggest that the group meets within the next week. Who is interested in being, okay? Who else? It would be great if Beth or Jill were on this group. You haven't spent enough time.
It's like a sentence.
So Ricky, are you on it? No.
Maybe.
Christina.
Okay, I didn't see the hand, sorry.
I could, if we could, depending on the schedule.
Well, I think we've got, you're both Brattleboro,
Yeah,
the Brattleboro High School.
yeah, the VUHS place.
So it'd be great if, I think, one from there.
You gonna do it?
I could, yeah, if it's long, if it's
So
during the day, yeah.
Christina, Ricky, we've got Guilford and Brattleboro town, is that,
Neither of us really,
none of you don't want to?
not really.
Want might be the wrong word.
We feel like we've done a lot of work. I guess for me personally, I feel like I've looked at the reds and I don't
You don't think it's worthwhile?
know.
So that might be an important voice in terms of the process. To say, well, I'm serious, in terms of, so why does somebody not think it's gonna work? You know,
I've already said.
well, again, I think you gotta go through a lot of scenarios to say, okay, so why wouldn't it work in this case? Or why would it work?
So maybe a different, Kim, would you be able to do this?
Not during the day. I could do it at night. Just,
Alice?
I work.
Could you do it at
7 in the
night?
morning to 5 at night, so
What time of night?
until like 5 o'clock, between 4:30 and 5, I get out of work at night.
Okay.
So it would have to be an evening.
Well, we could spend can you, if it is an evening, could the 4 of you do it?
Possible.
Yeah, okay. Can you guys get together? I prefer
Can be
not
held
to.
at the Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah. That's all right.
Okay, so can you guys figure out the time after this meeting and let Amy know? All right? And,
So do you have a voice from each town then?
except from Putney.
Why, what happened to that? Don't you want to be Rich?
Rich is not here.
Richard's not here.
not
Sounds
here,
like
he gets
he's not.
volunteered.
I will find someone from Putney,
Well, I just think
To
as
be
long
on
as
that
you're doing it,
committee.
yeah.
okay? Great. Yep.
And this is to look at red and.
Do we have somebody from
Yes.
Vernon?
Do we have somebody
Matt,
from Vernon? Not on there, or is somebody? Sorry, Matt. If we're throwing Putney under the bus, we're throwing Vernon under the bus too.
Matt?
So you'll find a Vernon person?
We're all equal.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll work.
Okay. And do we want to look at the conventional more closely, or ask Vernon to look at the
The
conventional?
committee
here?
looks at it.
What?
The committee looks at it.
I guess
This
my
committee
question
looks
is,
at that
if we're
too.
gonna look at, I think, maybe to Ian's point, if we're gonna look at conventional with everybody in, there's no difference except for the 10-cent tax there,
And the
right?
tax,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I don't know what else you have to look at
All
for
right.
that.
That's how I understand it.
If we
Yeah,
were gonna
we
look
could-
at it without all in, then I could see that worth investing, but if we're gonna look at it all
Yeah,
in.
basically, what we're comparing is that 10-cent tax bracket, in that extra year, worth
Right.
the time. And that's the scales there.
And it doesn't really make sense to look at anything without people all in it until there's a vote
Yeah,
that
so I don't
doesn't
think
go that way.
Well, and once we find out if nobody's not in, if the town's not in, we have time to look at the other
Right.
phases anyways. So,
Another year.
right, we don't need to focus so much on that because if the town opts out, we have no other option at that point, so.
Great, so you four are gonna get together at the end and let Amy know.
Plus Putney.
Plus, right, yes.
Somebody.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for all this time, guys. Working on this.
Yeah, thank you for your hard work, guys.
Yeah. Okay, so it's 7:05. This is the time when we open it up for public comments. Can anyone who's interested in speaking raise your hands? Okay, we've got at least two. Okay. So Jody, Inez, and Dan, and someone else might certainly jump in. But let's go from Dan, Inez, and then Jody.
Hi, my name is Dan Holland, from Dorset, school board member. I really appreciate all the hard discussion and work you're putting into this, especially this last hour or 45 minutes, talking about the options. I think it was great to finally hear some discussion about the options, and I think there should be more. I'd like, at the risk of getting laughed out of the room by the study committee, I'd like to see that you put equal time into discussing the, I forget the term that's used in Act 46, but it's continuing under the same governance structure. Because we are a model SU. We do a lot of things very well. We are the 5th largest SU in the state, which I've talked to several people and they've been shocked to hear that. We have some very high-performing schools from data test scores in our SU. We have done some things before other SUs have done them. Ron and his staff have done an excellent job of us being very proactive and doing things ahead of the curve. And I think Ron will agree that he's been brought to Montpelier, or whether he's brought to Montpelier or Montpelier's asked for his help and his input on several things, probably lots of things. So with that being said, it begs the question for me, and I wish it would beg the question for some of you, to discuss if we are doing such a good job. And I'm not saying that we can't get better. That's been one of my interests of being on the school board. We can always get better. We can always do things better. But if we're doing such a good job, what's the downside to continue doing a good job? And why risk changing something so big when you can't get out of it? So I would encourage you to spend some time discussing that from an advantages and disadvantages standpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
I'm Inez McGillian from Dummerston, and I apologize for trying to interject earlier, but there was a question aired and I had the answer sitting in my lap because I have Act 46 right here in my lap. But there was a question aired about whether the state could force Vernon into a union if the others went along with it under its powers to reorganize things. And Section 10 of Act 46 specifically limits the secretary and the board's power. And it says that any realignment that the state pursues has to adhere to the protections of Section 4. So I do not believe that Vernon could be forced into a union because that would violate Section 4. And also the state's power under Section 10 is actually limited. It doesn't have plenary power to realign people. So I just wanted you all to be aware of that, and I'm sorry, but it seemed pertinent to interject, but I'm happy to reserve it for public comment. And that's it.
Hi, Jody Normando, and I've got three things, starting from the minutes, because I wanted to get my hands up to make some changes. Your last minutes, on the second page, you talk about school choice, and I just wanted to clarify. It says Ron stated that all Vermont students have high school choice and gave the examples, and then all elementary students have high school choice. I would think that you should put something in there that says the money doesn't follow them, because that's not the same choice that we're talking about with Vernon. So that was my first comment.
So can I respond to that?
Okay.
The first sentence you said was correct, that all high school students have school choice where the money doesn't follow the student. Elementary school students, they don't have high school choice.
No, it says the share that the elementary choice is in place already. My point is, both of these choices don't, the money doesn't follow the students. And I think having it in the minutes, it makes it sound like the same type of thing that Vernon does. And that's why I had my hand up when you were doing your minutes. I didn't want to call on you. Secondly, I just have a question. In the school count, are the middle school students counted in the equalized student count, whether they're at Brattleboro or at Dummerston and Putney?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah,
Yes, except for Guilford, and of course, if a Vernon student is not attending BUHS, then they're not counted in BUHS.
No, but our Dummerston students are counted as middle school in Dummerston, but
Yeah.
Guilford students are counted for the Guilford ones.
That's right.
Okay. My second thing I wanted to interject, when they were talking here about 1,200 students or something. This is an article from VPR, October 27th, 2015, and it's headed, "The Vermont Agency of Education has released a clarifying document." Frequently asked question: does Act 46 require districts to form larger educational units with 900 and more students? No. Further explanation. The long answer is the 8 bullet points. And it says, does not require 900, does not require 1,100, does not require that any educational government units have a minimum number of students. And then Act 46 acknowledges that a preferred structure may not be possible or the best model to meet the goals in all regions. It states that a multi-district supervisory union, an alternative structure, may be the best way to meet the goals in some regions, particularly if the SU has 1,100 or more students. The final state plan issued by the State Board of Education in 2018 will merge previously unmerged districts, and this is highlighted, only to the extent necessary to achieve the goals, and only if it can do so while maintaining each district's operating tuition paying structure. Act 46 does not require that the districts created in the final state plan be of any particular size. And this is the Agency of Education, and this came out in October.
Right, so to respond to that, we asked that yesterday with the legal people, and that's the clarification I kept saying, in order to qualify for the tax incentives.
Well, I just know what this says, and so.
It's the same thing. You don't have to do it under those Act 46 rules, but they won't give you the tax incentives.
They won't give you the tax incentive, okay.
So you, they're saying, you know, Act 46 is, at least unless you're understanding it differently, Ron, that was.
No, that's true.
Yeah, so it's the same, it's, part of my frustration in doing this chart was finding things like that. You know, what exactly are you saying here? But they clarified for us when we talked to them.
So it seems to me that the Agency of Education would be very agreeable if we presented almost any kind of a plan or stayed the way we are.
Which is what we represented on the chart. You can do that, but you don't look at the tax incentives.
But did the state say that, or Chris Leopold?
Both. We actually passed it by Donna Russo Savage first, and she clarified that, and then we talked to Chris Leopold as well.
Okay.
So many hours of conversation.
May I finish a comment in relation to that is, these incentives, really, when it boils down to it, per property or per whatever, are pretty minimal. And then we really need to look at how much it would cost us to do this union with all the different changes, how much it's gonna cost us for adding administration, adding help for Frank, help for Ron, how much it's gonna cost us for these teachers that we wanna add on. And you need to compare that against what you're thinking of getting, which is not all that much per person. And I think that's it for me tonight. Thank you.
I,
Yes.
so, I just remembered the last time I tried to interject at the last meeting, and it seems out of context now, but I just wanted to point out that when Frank at one point presented a model showing that the cost of a program would be basically diffused over a larger equalized pupil base and thus buffering an effect on our tax rate in the sense that cost would not necessarily increase our taxes. I just wanted to point out that the same was true for savings. And so any savings achieved in merger is going to be buffered over a large equalized pupil base, and it would take a big ticket item to lower our tax rate. So I just wanted to point that out, that buffering works both ways. So.
Okay.
Charles Fish from Dummerston. Just very quickly, you know that my opinion is that protecting the local, the political, social identity of the town is more important than all the rest of this, in my opinion. But I also have a question about Frank's example of something that costs $20,000 spread over 100 kids. It costs so much. If you spread it over a much larger student base, it costs less. But doesn't that assume that it only takes $20,000 to cover many students or fewer students? I would think if the service provided is going to more students, the service might be more expensive. And therefore, you can't simply perform the calculation that you performed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the examples we were using, like expanding summer school program, that would probably be about $20,000 throughout the whole district. If you did that on a smaller scale, it's going to have an impact on that small budget as opposed to across the 2,500 students. It doesn't have much of an impact.
Well, I understand. I think I understand that. But if it costs $20,000 in a small school to do it for a few students, wouldn't it cost more than $20,000 to do it for many more students?
Well, I guess it depends on the program.
If it involved personnel, materials, transportation, I would think it would cost more.
Yeah, well,
Therefore,
I think the examples that we used, I don't know if I can get them right here, but.
Do you remember what they were in there?
I think it was after school, it was talking about existing programming and the after-school thing. I remember you saying, Ron, that we could add X number of students to the existing Brattleboro program without having to increase staffing.
Right.
In essence, like Guilford did, when we came out to Pratt, they didn't have to hire in any other teachers.
Right.
They just accepted what we had. It really cost the high school nothing to absorb us.
So I think the answer is it depends on what it is.
Yeah.
To be honest.
That makes
So there are
sense.
some examples that
That
it
makes
could work
sense.
the way we presented, and other examples that it would be like what you're presenting.
Like the example of foreign language, half of a position for a small district is going to cost a lot more than the two positions that could be covered by the whole SU. So that was an example that a small district probably would not, I think it was like a $38,000 or $40,000 impact has on their budget versus 4 times that in terms of staffing, so that's 2 full-time positions to work on all those 4 schools. When you spread that around 2,500 students, it really doesn't have that much of an impact. So it depends on the program.
Thank you.
So I've only seen one more hand, so I'm going to take Sean, and then we're going to go back to the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just interrupt? So if any of you have recently come into the room, can you fill out the sheet? There's a sheet going around.
It hasn't come here yet.
It hasn't come, so can someone keep passing it around? Name and town, please.
Sean Murphy from Guilford. This is just a little anecdotal story, actually, that happened on Monday. I went to the BAMS subcommittee meeting, and it was discussed that there was one full-time foreign language teacher at BAMS this year, and unbeknownst to me, and I'm sorry that I didn't pick it up in the budget, there was a .25 position that had to be eliminated. At that evening, we had the BUHS board meeting, and two former, the chair of the foreign language department, who was retired, and another esteemed foreign language teacher came to the board meeting, and they pleaded to the board to put back in that .25 position. It had also been mentioned by the principal of BAMS that morning that if this had been in a unified district, that probably wouldn't have come up, because you could take that very talented teacher and use that teacher's talents in another school in a unified district, where it's more complicated if it's an individual school.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, so let's get back to the agenda. We have 40 minutes left, and we do have, I do want us at the end to review, did you, Amy's draft of a schedule? And also we have several meetings to schedule for February and March. So some of the things that we talked about last time that we wanted to touch on with the report were leadership, councils, educational programming, defined core programs, current student and staff ratios, financial data, and then there was the tabled motion, which I think we should keep tabled, or we do? Oh, sorry, this is Jill's. Yeah, oh, that's your name. Ron has some stuff to bring based on some information from Jill. So I'd actually like to, the leadership councils, Richard has been involved in that and he's not here, so it's all right, let's put that aside. I'd actually love to jump into to put educational program aside for the moment, if that's all right, because there are two things that might take several minutes, and that is Frank talking about the student numbers and student staff ratio, and then Ron talking about the tabled motion. So why don't you start, Frank?
Okay. So the committee asked for some enrollment trend data, so I've done some data collection on that request. So I'll pass out some copies, and I'll see if I can fire this thing up too while that's going around. I didn't have time to do the UHS printout, but I do have it on a graph. Look at it.
Colored capability, Frank. We're going to get you colored capability, maybe in this new unified district budget.
Yeah.
Which one? The one that just was passed? I don't know if...
We can make the copy, right?
Well, actually, you could have my copy, because
I have a really smaller copy that you're welcome to have, that I printed off.
Okay, so the trend data that we have in this handout is three different school groups. So the data that you have in your document is the four elementary town school districts that are similar in size, so they fit on the same graph. So I'm looking at that first document, and what you see on the left is 2002 data. The legend there is student count, and this is just census data. It's also kindergarten through whatever school that operates, or the grade that school operates. So the first line, you can see I hand wrote in Dummerston, DTSD, at 186 students in Dummerston. Many of the schools are very similar size now. You see on the far right, current data is, so many of them are around 155, 160. You see a big cluster there. Pretty evident what you're looking at without much explanation, so I won't take up the meeting time discussing it. But in general, the trend over the last 10 plus years is down. No surprise. Some districts decline faster than others, and folks in Guilford know that in the 2013 year is where we see the middle school going to BAMS, and that's what accounts for that real significant drop.
Excuse me, Frank, are these real students or equalized students?
Yes, these are real students.
They're real students,
Yes.
thank you.
And we didn't include the pre-K just because it's so irregular. Some had it, some didn't. The next chart is a scale of 700 students to 840. So this is the Brattleboro town, and of course this is just K through 6, grade 6. A similar trend. And then we have the data on the last page of this document for the years, and it's the graphs are just representing. The additional information on this data sheet here is the percent changes. You remember when we talked about the assumptions when we did the financial model calculations. Here you see those trends that we've been talking about, and in total, for this particular period of 2002 to 2015, we're down 23%. But you can see the average is this 2 to 3% annual decline, and it hasn't really slowed down. It's been a pretty steady decline. So here we are in the BUHS data, very similar, so
WHS is only on the chart, not on the.
yeah, I can send you a printout. This is in the annual reports for the VUHS. We don't have this kind of data in the elementary, but this is a historical document that is in the annual report. So you would have seen this before. Not the graph. I just did the graph a few minutes ago, but here's the data actually that is represented in this graph. And it is interesting that the cumulative change is almost identical, 22% over the same period. And that is grade 7 through 12. This also includes the Career Center. This is the entire enrollment, 1,400 down to a current 1,100. The difference with this source data is this is internal data that has been maintained in the annual report for many years. So it's not the census data that you would find on the AOE, although it's going to be very similar. The handout is data that you could find on the AOE website. It's difficult to get. That's why it took a while, because you have to ask for 1 year, one school, take a snapshot of that, and as you can see, there's a lot of snapshots, but that's what we've done to make that available. I will also get to the equalized student data request. I probably won't be able to go back to 2002, but I'll go back as far as I can, and the committee was asking for that to illustrate. So here's the real student count. We know that just recently we've seen an increase in equalized student, and that's a reflection of higher poverty, and also the addition of the universal pre-K law and those 3 and 4 year olds that essentially the state has said the public education system will fund another grade level, basically another, the pre-K 3 and 4. The public school will pay for that in fiscal year 17, so that's part of our data.
Is there a projection for how it will go those numbers will continue
I
to
could
diminish?
it's easy to project the high school because, obviously you look at the prior 6 grades and project. I don't have birth rate data, but if folks know of some resource for that, I'd be happy to incorporate it into a projection. I think the good news for us is 3-4 years ago, we were seeing grade levels continuing to get smaller every year. And it seems like in many instances our grade levels are starting to flatten out. So here's where all of the chart data comes from. I can share this with you, but here's any school. Here's happens to be the Dummerston School. For a while we were seeing many of the grade levels going from 20 in these schools that are very similar, 20, 25, and then they were going down below 20. We seem to have stabilized at grade level sizes recently, which adds up to about 160 kids in our UHS per grade level, and that's become our floor.
Hold on. Does anyone on the committee have a question for Frank?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Yeah.
That, Frank, now I figured out what I was talking to you about earlier. So Frank was collecting that, and then the rest, I have it for everybody but Dummerston and Vernon. The other part of the question we talked about, which was class size, so that we could look at like how many kids are in actual each class. That's what I was looking at.
I got that from the principal, and I emailed it to you this afternoon,
So probably after I left home.
Yeah,
So-
I emailed it tonight.
Okay, so then I can pass that around and we could look at that at the next meeting if we want to publicly, but just to get an example, a feel for what is the actual class size across for several last years.
Yeah.
Well, these are the aggregates of the schools, right? It's not.
These are the aggregates, and they come from this data here, which is grade level data for each school over the years. This is the data that's
Some
on the
schools
website.
run 2 classes or 3 classes,
Yeah, so
like
this,
academies. So how many are we actually having in each class was the question.
right. Yeah, this is grade level, not class. Yeah, grade. I mean, if you're a small school with 1 teacher, 1 class per grade level, then this is the same. But yes, for several schools, that's not the case.
There's 3 in each grade. And Oak Grove has 1 and Green Street has 2. And
Summers together.
well, there's 20 kids in a class and most of them.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So just, so we can look at it and just, I feel like knowing is good.
Jill, when you get that information, can you send it to me? It'd be good, and then
Yeah.
Barb can send it around. It'd be good for us to put it on the web. We're consolidating a bunch of information to go on the website.
I think
that
I'm
could be a
close.
part of that. Go ahead, Jill.
I was just gonna mention, I haven't compared your figures to what I went through for the town report for Dummerston, but 10 years ago, we were practically identical to what we are today. We had a little bit of a boop there, and let's see, back when one of the kids were now 55 years of age, we had a huge boop. But we've been pretty consistent.
Is that what you show, right?
Yeah, here's Dummerston, yeah. Dummerston, you see here's the data, 2005, 10 years ago, is right there. You can look at the data sheet, and you can see that same number. Dummerston is probably the most stable out of all those lines. When you look at, you can see them on the colored lines. All the colored lines are all down. Dummerston had the downward trend, but they had an upward trend. They're the blue line on this.
Yeah, we did that little tent right there.
Yeah, they're the blue line. So when you look at 2005, you're 159, and here we are, 2015, 155. That's atypical in this data set.
That's kind of what we've done for years.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Just a quick question. I just see that you had percent change numbers on your projected screen, and it would be helpful to have them in printout form as well. I just noticed also that on your axes, I just want everyone to be aware that on the vertical axis, the numbers sort of start at the bottom. On the first page here, the numbers start at 105. And this dramatic decline may seem a little bit less dramatic if your X and Y axes actually both started, or at least if the vertical axis started at 0 instead of 105. And on the next chart, on that vertical axis, it starts at 700. There is a tendency in graphs, right, to accentuate dramatic changes if your vertical axis starts at the bottom of the change. You see what I'm saying?
And that's why
I'm just wondering if
yeah.
visually, because I think what matters is, I mean, any change or any decline can be made to look dramatic when plotted on a graph.
Right,
But I
that's-
think that the important statistics is knowing the percent change
Yeah.
and how it compares over a period of time.
And that is in that handout.
So can you summarize that again, that the percent change for all of us in the aggregate is 23%?
About a quarter, yeah, about a quarter of our population. This is very much like the state.
In 13 years.
And it's been a steady 2 to 3% decline every year, yeah. So
So, Frank, I'm wondering if the Dummerston situation, how does poverty, what's the relationship with poverty in these numbers?
there is no adjustment for poverty, so that's the second data collection where we look at equalized data.
Right.
This is just students that are reported by the school secretaries in November of every year to the agency of ed by grade level.
I understand that, I do believe that Dummerston, for the most part, has a pretty stable economic,
Yeah.
so that,
Yeah.
I
Oh,
would just be
I see.
interested to know how that is built into the number
Stay
fluctuation.
tuned for next week's
You know,
data.
I see,
Well, we don't
Dan.
have the historical, but we have the current.
I think this is a really good example of, what we've been finding as we've been looking through is that each town's situation is so.
Guys, we can hear you whispering.
Each town's situation is so different, and so it's what makes this discussion difficult, is that what could be really good for one town could not be really good for another.
Or would be different.
Would be different for another. And so I think that this is a good example of where we're seeing a decline in a lot of our populations, and Dummerston is an anomaly in that. But I think it points out that each of our towns is in a different situation.
Were you gonna add something, Ron?
Well, in the chart that we had given to the study committee and the public early on, we have the percentage of free and reduced lunch numbers. So these are current, they're not historical, but, Brattleboro Academy is 61%, Green Street is 69%, Oak Grove is 56, Dummerston is 32, Guilford's 51, Putney's 49, Vernon's 37. So, you could look at that over 15 years, and I know like Brattleboro Town went from like 35% to over 60. I'm not sure if that's what you're gonna be providing.
The equalized data would show that.
Yeah.
So it's the data that sets the tax rate.
Yeah.
So, Jill, and then we should.
Yeah, so, I
Jill,
think.
well, actually, Jill, can Frank, Mark first.
I just have one quick historical question, since you mentioned historical data. And it maybe or may not have any bearing on what we're doing right now. How long did it take to create the Wyndham Southeast Supervisory Union to where it is right now, at the beginning? That's before my time. Does anybody have any data on that? Any long-term memories?
Long-term.
Well, the Union High School was established in the 50s.
50s.
So they moved from big school, so I think it was either 54 or
Yeah, probably
55 in
soon
that
after
era.
that.
They moved out of the old, what's now the police department.
Right.
My mom was the first class at the high school, where it is now.
Well, the
So
reason I
that's
ask is,
about the year.
we're talking accelerated and conventional and do nothing. And I was just curious as to how more mature minds back then, how long it took them to create the 6 schools, or 6 districts into the supervisory unit we have right now.
I think that was established with the Union High School.
Okay, so
Those
Union High
towns
School
joined
brought them
the
all
Union High
together.
School brought them together.
Okay, thank you.
Dan?
A couple of points, thank you. I'm really glad to see this data. Some of us asked for it back in the fall, and when we didn't get it, I went and did some of my own, but my focus is Dummerston, so I focused on Dummerston as a school board member, and my numbers, just like Frank said, it's very difficult. You have to go in and get one number at a time off the AOE website, so I can appreciate the difficulty in getting these. And my numbers are a little different than Frank's, but they were taken off, but they show that general curve, and if you do a linear regression analysis over that 12-year period, it actually shows that we're flat to increasing students. I also noticed that Vernon, I had been told this, but I see in the chart that it looks like they're stabilizing as well. A couple other points, Vernon has not too disparate a poverty-free and reduced lunch as Dummerston. Take it for what it is. I don't know how accurate those numbers are, but it's interesting correlation. Although the cynic in me thinks the higher the poverty, the more children you'd have. But I'm not going to repeat that. But one thing I'd encourage the study committee to think about is, I think we're going through a huge demographic change in our country, and it's evident here as well with the aging of the baby boomers. And I think there ought to be some analysis put in. I can't do it. I don't think anybody here can, but we ought to speak to somebody that understands, sociologist maybe, that understands demographic patterns. But maybe what we're going through here is a period when we're coming off of the baby boomers having their babies and maybe their children having their babies, and who knows, maybe we're getting into entering a new era of stability. I don't know that, but it would be interesting to know and have that information before we go and make some dramatic change based on the past, because as in so many things, the past is not a good indicator or projector of the future. So I just would like to see the study committee think about those things too.
Yeah, we have Jill, and then we'll move on.
Just the reason that I wanted to see this data is that at the state level of the Vermont School Board Association, they've shown a couple of years ago really dramatic information about the state's whole population and the age of the population, and it pretty much answers your question that we are going to continue to decline in enrollment.
They have a projection based on
what, well, they looked at the past, but they also said looking at what we have for an age of people in the state, older people are not the ones having the children. Sure. So by that, you get to the supposition, you come around to the idea that it's going to continue to decline.
The new era that I'm speaking about, maybe I'm hypothesizing, is that, and we need this to happen, is the importation of people. In order for us to grow our economy and continue to survive business-wise, we're going to
look at that, and they said no, that was not what was happening. They said, sure, that'd be great. But
no, I'm talking about what will happen.
So that's my whole point being that this is, I wanted to see this because when you could say Dummerston is stable, and it looks like it's fairly stable, but 23% over this many years, to me, is dramatic. I don't know who was arguing that word. I'd take a different view of that. It's dramatic.
Okay, thank you.
Now, let's go. Just one quick comment, please.
Yeah.
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
You were talking Dummerston, you're talking about Vernon. And Dummerston's stable because people moved to Dummerston for the school. Vernon's stable because they moved there for choice. And so I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind.
Well, we're also going to look at some poverty numbers and some other equations
Next
week, which are definitely a huge part of that. Okay, so is it okay? Can we move on? So we have less than 20 minutes, and we have a bunch to get through with Ron here. We do need to leave about 5 minutes at the end to talk about scheduling. All right.
So on the agenda, we have the table motion about the school grade closure information. So I didn't print off a whole new copy of the study report, but I just copied the section that Jill had provided as an alternative. And so if you remember, on the top of Article 7, we had the school operations, that no school would close within a 5-year period. Thereafter, it would be an affirmative vote of 2/3 of the full membership of the board of directors and an affirmative vote of the town. Jill spoke a lot about the fact that she didn't feel like one town should have that type of power. So the alternative, the revised information is the next 2 pages in italicized print. And I'm going to turn it over to Jill to highlight her suggestions.
So there's suggestions, and you can all do what you want, but in trying to have a voice that the town would be able to say, but at the same time not have a veto power, so that what I call taxation without representation. So I changed it to no schools or classrooms, such as 7th and 8th grade classrooms currently housed at Putney and Dummerston, will be closed, and I changed here from, I think it was 4 or 5, I changed it to 3, just argue about it, after this merger takes place through 2020. Individual movement of children in a specific classroom or grade configuration are not considered to be closures, because we talked about that and I thought it needed some clarification. After the 3 years, as of June 2020, any decisions on closing schools or removing classrooms from a school would have to go through 1 year of study and public discussion before the unified board could vote. During that time, school closures could be reviewed because of a major capital investments needed to maintain a building, a school's class size, inabilities to cost effectively deliver equitable services, an inequitable level of opportunities provided to varying student population, or any other motive, I guess needs to have a word there, that the unified board feels justified to warrant consideration of a closure. This gets at that question that we were mumbling about of how would a school know it shouldn't be a surprise, so this would give you some parameters as to why a unified board could look at it. The unified board would thoroughly analyze the full financial implications of the change, including the cost savings, the impact on staff in that facility, the likelihood of sale of the existing buildings, the cost of carrying an empty building, and transportation costs to send current students to another location if applicable. In other words, some more parameters again there to reassure people that it cannot just be taken because today we don't like whatever school as a unified board and we're going to close it. It's a full-on analysis. And I'm sure there's other things you guys could add in. The unified board would thoroughly review the equity to be gained in the decision, ensuring that the affected students would gain from the move in educational opportunities. As is the case with Guilford and going to BAMS, I think that, from what I understand from all of you, that was the main reason to move the kids. And that should be the main reason for moving a kid, but again, we also have a responsibility to taxpayers, so looking at it from both of those lenses. As a part of the analysis process, the affected students and their parents' guardians would be asked to complete a survey indicating their specific concerns and feelings towards a potential change. My biggest concern in our discussions is that I don't think we're asking those who are most affected, and I wanted to make sure that got in there. Additionally, the unified board will provide a survey to the town members asking for their opinions on the closure's effect on their overall community. All of these reports would be shared publicly during television meetings and put on the district website. The public would be advised of the potential change and its review at the very beginning of the year-long process, and no vote could be held until at least 1 year after the public was advised of the change being considered by the unified board. The unified board would hold public forums to describe their analysis process and to hear public comment 4 times during this year-long process. The first would be as the announcement is made, the second at month 4, the third meeting at month 8, the final at a meeting to be held 1 week before the actual townwide vote. This is all out of my head, so feel free to say whatever you want and change. I don't know anything, I just put it down.
It's pretty good.
The unified board can decide to discontinue its analysis at any time during this process, but no school change could be made without completion of the entire year-long process and the 4 public forums. At the town meetings of all members of the unified district, each town will vote on the change. The article sent to the voters will include the exact timing of the proposed change. This vote of all towns in the district is binding, and the unified board will act according to the decisions from the district-wide vote. So anyway, thoughts? Go ahead and speak away.
This seems more like a procedure than a...
Well, there's some main changes.
Yeah.
I tried to put a procedure because I thought that
No, I think it's great.
it walked me through, like, how would it happen and how can we get input. It does take away the veto. That was there.
So are you suggesting adding recommended procedure to this, or is this?
No, this doesn't seem necessarily like a policy, but it is definitely a more procedural
But it's required procedure.
Right.
And maybe that doesn't have to go into the study groups, articles of agreement, but I felt like it needs to be for the towns. We need to have some idea of what we're saying.
I think it made sense to have this level of detail for this discussion. I think if we adopt this, the thing about like when the meetings take place, that could be procedural, and you don't want to strap a future board on that, but the idea of 3 or 4 of those public sessions is important to state.
Why did you choose 3, changing from 5 to 3?
Years or something.
Years, yeah.
Because honestly, we're 23% down in 10 years, in 12 years, whatever it is. And I think we need to be able to say to this board needs to have the ability to move if that needs to happen. I'd love to have Dan's suggestion that we're suddenly bringing in tons of people and taxpayers, but if it's not, I feel like the board needs to not have itself so hamstringed. But if it's all thoughts, throw it back to 5, it's fine. I'm not going to jump up and down. I'm jumping up and down about taxation without representation.
So if you had 4, if you have 3, it's actually 4 because of the year-long study. If you had 4, it's actually 5. So, you still have 4 years in there.
We talked before, and I think it was kind of dismissed a little bit, but what about the idea of putting some parameters around it, like a certain over the last 3 years, they've seen a declining enrollment of a certain percentage, or average class size over the past 3 years has gotten below a certain level.
I hate that because, I just don't see how you can determine the viability of a school just based on student numbers. I think I was really impressed with all of the second bullet, this first and second bullet, in terms of identifying the reasons why you consider it. And I like that. I just don't, I cringe, you put a number in there and it's like,
You're setting yourself up for failure
Yeah.
there.
But what if that was not a trigger to say close or don't close, but that was part of the trigger to say we enter into this analysis? So that,
Mark?
Real quick, right there, and Jill has it after, as of June 2020, any decision on closing schools, 3 years, we have to imagine that a discussion is going to precede any decision point. So it's going to be amply available to anybody for maybe several years before you get to any decision point.
For me, this is just an agree to disagree. I don't support this. I feel the town should have a veto saying this. I think what we talked about before, convincing towns that the school is not the best viable option for their students is the way to go. It's my own personal stance on it, but that's
Well,
where I
the
stand.
decision could, or the discussion, getting to the decision point could involve the other schools in the district or the super district,
Kim, and then this side.
And Matt, I get that. We've always used one of the small schools as an example. Say a decision was made to close one of the Brattleboro schools. You have the whole Brattleboro electorate saying no, and then every other town is then having to pay.
That could be changed to the wording, though.
You can't. If we're saying the town votes and they have veto, Brattleboro has veto.
No, I mean, as far as it could be changed to wording as in every town shall maintain a school instead of every school. So, I mean, there's ways around that. I mean, you can get by that.
The point comes back to the same thing. Then why does Brattleboro not get to say, hey, you can't close one of our schools?
Right.
Okay, well, the rest.
And then everybody and all the other towns are now having to pay for our 3 schools.
Why don't you respond, and then we'll go over here.
For me, so if your town meetings are held in all of the outlier schools, there's not an elementary school in Brattleboro, to my knowledge, that hosts the town meeting. So the community center is just different in that nature. One example right there by itself. I mean, it's just a different thing. In Vernon, we have the rec center, as you all came in tonight. There were dozens of kids playing basketball in there. If a committee decided to close this building, that's gone too. I mean, there's just practical things like this. I mean, you can go over to Twin Valley, where they used to have their high school, and go into that building that they've now moved the business administration office into, but it's sat empty for several years. I mean, so it's not like, oh, you can use it if there's no heating and it's not being used and running. I mean, it's just not a black and white thing for me. It's just something I disagree with. I mean, I do absolutely respect everybody's viewpoint on this. I just disagree with it. It comes down to that.
Which is fair. Christina and then Ricky?
I just want to point out to Kim that Brattleboro has a majority vote. So if Brattleboro does not want a school closed, they automatically have a majority vote. But we don't have a House and a Senate situation here where there's veto power of a bill. You're talking about a small town that has a very small portion of the electorate. So you wouldn't, if Brattleboro voters don't want a school closed, and it's a district vote, they're the majority.
But we were, sorry.
Do you have something to?
I was just kind of commenting on something that Beth was saying about numbers and putting numbers in, because I feel like the first bullet and the second bullet really, it talks about school class size and things like that. It doesn't give a quantifiable number, because I think when you're talking about equalized pupil and other situations, disability, things like that, that would dramatically change. You know, you could have 20 kids in a particular class, and if everybody's functioning at a pretty good place, that's one thing. But you could have 10 kids in a class, and if you have 3 of them that are dealing with some severe disabilities, that dramatically changes the need. And so putting a qualifiable number on there would really be a dramatic effect. But I think that it talks about in this what Jill wrote, you know, class size, school size, cost, those kinds of things. So that was my reaction.
Did you want to respond in any way?
Well, it was just in regards to, you know, Brattleboro, because we're not going to, if the super board has decided they're going to close, obviously the Brattleboro representatives have already said, yes, we think we should go to the study. So we've already agreed. Then if the town has the veto, the town could overrule everything. That's what I'm getting at. Because if we've already gone to the study group and said we want to close a Brattleboro school, and we're going through all of this, the super board has already agreed that a school should be closed.
Do you want to respond?
Well, I just also want to weigh in that I agree with Matt on this and prefer the wording that other towns have used, that the town has a veto vote on this. And I think I've heard from a lot of people in my town. I mean, we haven't had a public forum on this. I'd be happy to bring this to a public forum, but I've pretty much heard to a person that they're concerned about school closure in Dummerston.
I think you're asking people to give up a lot. And I think you potentially can gain a lot, let's be honest here. I mean, I think there's a lot to gain, but I think for a lot of people, losing your local boards and having one rep in these small towns is a lot. And I think just the thought, whether it's reality or not, but just the thought that your building can be closed without your voters getting a say in that, it's a tough pill to swallow. It just is.
But you would get a say in this. You just didn't
Yes
get
and
veto
no.
power.
I mean, you get to weigh in at a forum and stuff, but you don't technically get your voting say, let's word it that way. I mean, in an ideal situation, I can agree with what is on here. I mean, honestly. But things don't always work out that way. You know, I mean, when things work smoothly and people listen to both sides and you present the evidence and people have an open mind about things, I understand this. Yeah, it could be something that makes sense and works well, but that's not always reality, you know? And I think most of the time things do flow smoothly. I mean, but
I'm going to take an unusual situation. Can you just be brief? Because it's 2 minutes.
Debbie Hebert, Vernon School Board. I haven't been involved in this, so I just want clarity from what I just heard. Am I hearing correctly that this unified board could vote to shut Vernon down and we wouldn't have a veto? Is that what I'm understanding?
So this is up for discussion. We're discussing potential language.
Okay, but in the language, that's what you're saying, that the unified board could vote to close Vernon or Putney or Guilford.
Every town has to vote. That's what I put in.
But we don't have a veto, is what you
We
said.
don't have a veto, but the board is not voting. That's different from what you're saying.
So, if I understand this right, every town could vote to close Vernon, and Vernon would not have a veto. Am I correct?
That's what's being discussed.
Am I correct? That's what you're discussing, though,
Yeah.
and that's the way you're going. That's the wording
I would
you've
not say
chosen.
that's the way we're going at all.
Debbie, in the original draft,
I don't have that either.
no, well, if you have the copy that was sent around, it's in the,
I didn't get
can somebody?
I had the original.
Okay. Yeah, so in the original, it's got that language that it would be a 2/3 vote of the full membership of the board, and then an affirmative vote of the town in which the school is located. So that was the original language, and now this revises that. That's what we're discussing.
This is a suggestion from one member of the committee to consider. We're not going in any direction right now, and I think there's a lot of people are questioning that language.
If it's more than the language that I'm questioning, I want to make perfectly clear that I would not vote for that, and I would strongly encourage my town not to vote for that whatsoever.
I think you don't stand alone.
No, I don't. I
Okay,
know that.
so it's 7:58. If it
I'll
could
be very brief.
Really,
Sorry.
because this is going against everything.
And I know, but it is.
Very quick, and then we need to move
It is
on and
immediately
close.
pertinent, but thank you, Jill, for coming up with it, and this is actually a thoughtful way to try to address this problem, right? Because I agree that it is potentially a problem. I just have to point out that even if all of you disagree with this proposition and keep the old language in, and keep the town veto in, under 706N, the minute a union board is formed, they could vote to amend the Articles of Agreement and just reinsert this, or something without these protective procedures. And that's something to consider.
So
Thank you, Inez. Go
that
ahead.
speaks to the same response that I gave at the last study committee meeting
Yes.
about Chris Leopold's point. Articles of agreement, we are hearing that the articles can easily be changed by the new board. His response was, it is not easy for a new board to change the articles. You would need district voters to approve. Could put provision of specific town in a transfer of property. So he's saying this is a charter. You can't just, the new board can't just say, we're amending the charter. It would have to go to the district votes.
I saw that email, and I did have questions about it, because it appears to be actually your email, not Chris Leopold's. And we don't have a written legal opinion from Chris Leopold.
That was his comment to me that I quoted.
But you quoted it,
sorry,
but we
we're
don't,
not-
I have to say this, because this is a problem. Chris Leopold has not given this committee a written opinion. He has verbally communicated to you something that has been filtered in an email. He doesn't cite any authority for this opinion. He doesn't even cite 706N.
Okay, thank you.
Can I summarize what I was doing?
If it's short, Jill, because we're already over and we've got
Just because
several minutes.
you guys are all saying, Vernon should vote this way or whatever, and we all have, I appreciate it, Matt. I appreciate too a lot and that's what I try to get at with saying, that we need to look at the full implications of the change and what it means to that town, and I get it. I absolutely get it. And if we were this board, I think we would all be, we would say, okay, we understand each other, know where we're coming from because we've been at it for a while. As a taxpayer in Brattleboro, I would have to say I'd veto the whole thing based on that. So just as strongly as you guys are saying, it's that strong, to me, it's that strong the other way, that's asking for Brattleboro to say, we're gonna continue to support whatever outlying school of whatever configuration, as long as that town keeps saying, we want our school.
Thank you, Joe. So I think we should table this, because there's no way we're going to come to any sort of resolution right now. We could potentially vote on some language next week. I think we've got some more language to potentially look at. Chip away at it a little bit more, see if we can come to some sort of agreement. So we're running over. Amy wrote up a chart for us. We don't have time to talk about it, but I'd like us to, before the next meeting, look at it. If we do the accelerated merger, this chart suggests 517 State Board of Education consideration. We could do an earlier one or a later one. Okay, so April 19th would be an earlier one. And then June would be later, which is part 2, which is pretty far out. So take a look at this and we'll discuss it next time. Ron has suggested a couple of meetings. Ron, you suggested only one in February. I think we need two.
Well, so we have the forum at Vernon on February 8th. I was suggesting, what I was trying to do is match them to board meetings. So February 11th, it's Putney Central starting at 5. You start your study committee at 6. March 2nd would be aligned with Brattleboro Town's meeting.
So are these for sure, we're putting these in the?
No, I was just suggesting dates just because looking at school board dates and trying to fit them in.
What was the first one you said?
So February 11th,
Okay.
that would be
Our
prior
town
to
meeting
the...
is March 2nd.
Yeah.
February 11th
March
at Putney.
1st. March 1st.
All the,
March 1st.
Oh, it's March 1st?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
you're correct.
Yes.
I
So
was
March
trying to
2nd
get
is a
it.
day off, actually. No,
Okay.
it's not a day off.
Okay.
But it's, it would be aligned to the Brattleboro Town School Board meeting. Another one in March could be March 10th.
I don't know, are we typing these in? Is it just?
No,
Well, I'm
so
putting out
you're
dates.
suggesting that the February 8th is an actual study committee meeting that's attached to a forum?
No, it's the forum that the study committee...
That's the Vernon Act 46 meeting already.
Yes. Yeah.
So as many of us who can come to that should?
Yeah.
If that's what we're saying?
What time
7
is
to
that?
9?
6.
6?
You're talking the February 8th meeting?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, and as a Vernon school board member, we love to have you here for input if we ask for it, but this is definitely for a town. This is our town. Our town to talk to our town to get feedback. So although we're asking you to come, that doesn't mean you necessarily will have a right to ask to talk.
Yeah, our expectation is that the study committee wouldn't function this way.
I hope not.
Right. We would need to provide the financial models and some of the information that really hasn't been available to the Vernon public.
Yes, and there's a lot of information that
Right.
has not been for the public at all.
So I'm not saying that's a study committee meeting, that's just, I know we have a date, February 8th.
Okay.
So February 11th, March 2nd, March 10th.
Yeah.
So that really is only one official meeting in February.
Yeah, well,
So I
is the
think we-
vacation week,
Are we doing the 11th for sure?
February 11th?
Is there anyone who can't do the 11th?
Have to change another meeting.
That's at 6 o'clock or 6:30?
Yeah.
6.
And Putney.
And that's in Putney?
Yeah. So is vacation too complicated to have another meeting?
Not for me.
So after the February 11th, what date do you want to go to next?
Ron, do you know when the high school has like their meet the teacher nights and everything? Because the new semester has started? Just thought I'd throw that out there.
They have something February 8th for new students, like
Okay.
8th grade.
Right, but I know with the new semester, we're gonna be having
Yeah, I don't know, I
teacher
don't have.
nights. for-
Like a parent conference night?
Yeah.
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 I don't have that. I doubt it's gonna be that early.
Okay.
Yeah, it wouldn't be until probably late February, early March, I would be my
Well, I
guess.
know they have the where you go.
Yeah, block
so-
schedule.
Yes, not just the conferences.
So are we doing the 11th?
We are.
Okay, at Putney, 6
Yeah.
o'clock.
I'm just concerned that we're only having one in February.
Shoot, we had a suggestion here, Beth was thinking the 29th, since we have a bonus day of February.
Let's spend it together.
As if we don't spend enough time
I would just
together.
caution that that's the Vernon Town meeting.
Oh, then it'll,
Okay,
That will not work.
did we say we can't do it during February vacation week?
No, we did not say that you could
What about Thursday, February
People are
18th?
gone.
That works.
People are gone.
We have to town meeting.
Spirit if not
I
physical.
can't do it.
What about Wednesday, the 17th?
A lot of people are gone.
Are you gone the 17th?
None of us are.
No.
What about the
Wednesday-
17th?
17th is
February 24th,
we can do that.
Going anywhere, I'm gonna be here.
Okay, February 24th.
Study committee?
Okay, March 11th, February 24th, March 2nd, March
Where
10th.
on the 24th?
February 24th.
Guilford,
Guilford.
Guilford.
do you want to?
Somebody gonna light that place up?
There you go, Alex.
Okay, March 2nd is Brattleboro, March 10th.
How long
Well, no, we can't put these in here.
Where in Brattleboro on the second?
Academy School,
Academy.
where we hold our town representative meeting as part of the larger community, Matt.
Because the high school charges too much.
Just to know.
March 10th location?
Putney Central.
Okay. Do we need to make?
What about, have we done, not the Dummerston?
Should we go through the rest of
We've done those.
Dummerston?
Yeah, March
Uh,
2nd.
We've had two in Dummerston.
What's
The
that?
24th is in
March
Guilford.
2nd, we'll have a
You want to
configuration
do
of
a
our
third
board
meeting in
meeting
March?
that night.
Yeah.
You could do it in
I
Cal.
think so too.
No.
So,
We have a school board meeting.
guys, let's do a third meeting towards the end of March.
Wait, we can't do the 2nd then, no March 2nd meeting?
We are March 2nd, March 10th, and one towards the end.
They're having problems with the 2nd in Guilford.
Well, we can
Figure
figure
it
it
out.
out. We can
Okay,
figure it
figure
We
it
did
out.
a meeting tonight here in
out.
Vernon.
The 10th is where in Putney?
Putney. And now, Amy, can you suggest something for the
Why
end
not the
of?
This is
24th?
very tricky here, guys.
Okay,
Hold on, slow down.
We can't do it.
okay. Can we do March 24th? March 24th? Where can that be?
I can't get them in this fast.
March 24th, look, Dummerston?
March 24th is Monday, Thursday. I can't do the
24th is a
24th.
Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why wouldn't you do?
I can't.
Can we do the 22nd in Dummerston? March 22nd?
Okay.
Tuesdays are not good.
I'd rather not do Tuesday.
Can you do it anyway?
Of course.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Beth.
I think I'm lost anyway.
Okay, so March 22nd, Dummerston.
Can we review the bidding?
Should I go over it again?
2 Hertz?
From like the 1st of March on.
So,
No, maybe
March
all of them.
2nd, Brattleboro, March 10th, Putney, March 22nd, Dummerston, all 6 o'clock.
Maybe we could do from February on, I'm just gonna write them down. 'cause I'm not sure.
February 8th, there's a forum here, which we're sitting in on, we're observing and participating as requested. February 11th,
Yep.
we are where? Putney.
Putney.
February 24th, we're in Guilford. And again, March 2nd, Brattleboro, March 10th, Putney, March 22nd, Dummerston.
March 10th is the parent conference night for the high school.
Well, Beth has to give a
Okay.
vacation.
Just,
Okay,
Doesn't that start at 3?
No, that's not vacation.
it has to be wicked quick.
Really quick.
What was March, March?
I would just like to confirm, I think I was told by Nicole Mays that after the board meeting that happens where the articles of agreement go to the board, the vetting time from the board is 4 to 5 weeks.
No, not the school boards?
No, the state board. In other words, the state board looks at the article of agreement, and then there's a 4 to 5 week pause while they're making the decision whether that is all comes together or
I don't
not.
believe that's actually true.
Yeah, I was told that, so I just thought I'd throw that out.
Thank you. We'll look into that, but I've been told differently from Donna. So we will talk to Donna and Chris.
Maybe it
Look
was
into
Donna
that.
that mentioned that to me, so
Yeah.
I thought, oh my goodness, that's gonna eat up a lot of
She's
time.
reviewed the schedule with me, so she did not, we're not on that calendar. If we need to be, we need to pay attention if this actually goes forward. All right, is, any further business, or can I accept a motion?
No, can we read these again, because I'm slower.
I would love to. February 8th,
Yes.
Vernon is having their own Act 46 meeting. We are participating as requested. February 11th in Putney. February 24th, Guilford. March 2nd, Brattleboro.
Okay.
March 10th, Putney. March 22nd, Dummerston.
So there's nothing.
Is there a
Motion
motion?
adjourned.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
Trench.
Thank you, everyone.